The September sun painted the streets of Portland with golden light that filtered through the low clouds typical of Oregon. At Petal and Stem, a small flower shop in the heart of the Pearl District, Sarah Chen meticulously organized the morning arrangements. The aroma of fresh roses mixed with the smell of damp earth and coffee coming from the neighboring bakery, creating an olfactory symphony she had learned to love over the past 3 years. Sarah, 28 years old, had inherited the flower shop from her Aunt Margaret, an eccentric woman who believed flowers had souls of their own. A botany graduate from Portland State University, Sarah brought scientific knowledge to the business while maintaining the artistic touch that made each arrangement unique. Her black hair was pulled back in a messy bun, some strands escaping as she worked, and her delicate hands moved with precision among petals and stems. The morning was proceeding normally until the door chime rang with more force than usual. Sarah looked up and saw 2 men entering the shop. The first was tall and thin, wearing an impeccable gray suit that contrasted with his ice-cold eyes. The second, shorter and stockier, kept his hands in the pockets of his black leather jacket. Both examined the environment with the attention of those accustomed to assessing threats. "Good morning," said Sarah, forcing a smile while wiping her hands on her floral apron. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit approached the counter, his steps echoing on the wooden floor. "We need a special arrangement, something elegant, for an important occasion." "Of course," Sarah replied, grabbing her notepad. "What kind of occasion?" "This helps me choose the right flowers." The 2 men exchanged a quick glance. "A business meeting," said the man in the suit after a pause. "Something that demonstrates respect." Sarah nodded, accustomed to clients who preferred to keep details private. Portland was a city where many preferred discretion, especially in the business world. "I have some suggestions. White roses symbolize respect and honor. Lilies represent dignity." "No," interrupted the shorter man, speaking for the first time. His voice was rough, as if he had smoked for decades. "It needs to be something more impressive. Our boss doesn't accept anything common." The word boss made Sarah pause for a moment. There was something in the way he pronounced it that suggested more than a simple corporate hierarchy. She observed the 2 men more carefully. The rigid posture, the constantly moving eyes, the way the man in the suit kept his right hand slightly away from his body, as if ready to reach for something quickly. "I understand," said Sarah, keeping her voice calm. "How about orchids? They're elegant, sophisticated, and demonstrate appreciation for rare beauty." The man in the suit smiled for the first time, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perfect. We want the best you have. Money is no object." Sarah led them to the premium orchid section, where she kept her most expensive flowers. The white and purple phalaenopsis gleamed under the soft light, their petals appearing almost translucent. She explained the different varieties, noticing how the men paid more attention to the surrounding environment than to her words. "These cattleyas are especially rare," said Sarah, pointing to a group of orchids with petals in shades of pink and white. "They just arrived from a specialized grower in Hillsboro." "How many do you have?" asked the man in the suit. "About a dozen. I can make a magnificent arrangement with them." "We want them all." Sarah blinked, surprised. "All of them? That would cost over $1,000. The shorter man was already pulling out a wad of bills from his pocket. "Like I said, money is no object." While Sarah prepared the estimate, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just the money. Portland had its share of wealthy businessmen. It was something more subtle, the way they spoke in codes, how they constantly checked the windows, how the man in the suit unconsciously touched the left side of his chest, where Sarah suspected there was a weapon. "When will the arrangement be ready?" asked the man in the suit. "I can have everything ready by 3 in the afternoon. Will you pick it up, or do you prefer delivery?" "Delivery," he said quickly. "I'll give you the address." Sarah grabbed a pen, but he shook his head. "Don't write it down. Memorize it." He recited an address in the Nob Hill neighborhood, an area known for its historic mansions and high-end residences. "Ask for Vincent Torino. Say it's the special arrangement." The name echoed in Sarah's mind. Vincent Torino. She was sure she had heard that name before, but couldn't remember where. maybe on the news, in some bar conversation. The feeling of familiarity was disturbing. After the men left, leaving cash payment on the counter, Sarah was alone with her thoughts. She counted the bills, exactly $1,200, without haggling or questioning the price. That alone was suspicious. In her 3 years managing the flower shop, she had never encountered clients so willing to pay without negotiating. Sarah began working on the arrangement, her hands moving automatically while her mind processed the morning's events. She selected the best cattleyas, their light pink petals with darker edges, creating a mesmerizing pattern. She added some exotic foliage and eucalyptus branches to give structure and aroma. While working, memory finally clicked. Vincent Torino. She had read about him in the Portland Tribune a few weeks ago. It wasn't a main story, just a mention in a column about local business. Something about real estate investments, and there were other insinuations. Rumors about connections with less legitimate activities. Sarah stopped working, her hands trembling slightly. She grabbed her phone and did a quick search. Vincent Torino appeared in several articles, always between the lines, never as the main focus. Local businessman, private investor, influential figure in the community. But there was something between the lines, a subtle suggestion that his business went beyond what it appeared. An article from 2 years ago mentioned a federal investigation into money laundering that had cooled down after several witnesses changed their testimonies. Another talked about an Italian restaurant where Torino was a partner, known for its private meetings and exclusive clientele. Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. She was preparing flowers for someone who, by all indications, was involved with the mafia, not the movie Mafia, with Italian accents and explicit violence, but the modern and sophisticated version that operated through legitimate businesses and political influence. She looked at the half-finished arrangement. The orchids were truly beautiful, their soft colors contrasting with the darkness of her suspicions. For a moment she considered canceling the delivery, returning the money and pretending nothing had happened. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the survival instinct that told her canceling now could be more dangerous than moving forward. Sarah decided to continue, but with redoubled caution. She finished the arrangement with meticulous attention, each flower positioned perfectly. She used an imported crystal vase she had saved for special occasions. If she was going to do this, she would do it right. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Sarah loaded the arrangement into her delivery van, a white Ford Transit with the petal and stem logo painted on the sides. The arrangement was magnificent, the orchids seeming to float in the crystal vase, surrounded by foliage that created a perfect contrast. The address led her to a restored Victorian mansion in Nob Hill, with impeccable gardens and a stunning view of the city. The house was painted blue-gray, with white details, its tall windows and ornate verandas speaking of a time when Portland was just a growing port city. Sarah parked in the circular driveway and grabbed the arrangement. Her hands were slightly damp with nervousness, but she took a deep breath and walked to the main door. Before she could ring the doorbell, the door opened. A middle-aged man greeted her. He was different from the two who had visited her shop. Shorter, with graying hair combed back and a genuine smile. He wore a navy blue polo shirt and khaki pants, looking more like a university professor than a criminal. "You must be Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't identify. "I'm Vincent Torino. Please, come in." Sarah hesitated for a moment. "I just came to deliver the arrangement, Mr. Torino." "Nonsense," he said, gesturing for her to enter. "After creating something so beautiful, you deserve to see where it will be placed. Besides, I'd like to discuss the possibility of a regular contract." Against her better judgment, Sarah entered. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Dark, polished wooden floors, antique furniture that seemed to have been carefully selected, and artwork she suspected were originals. Everything spoke of money, but also of good taste. "Your house is beautiful," said Sarah, following Torino through a hallway decorated with black and white photographs of old Portland. "Thank you. I bought it 5 years ago and spent a lot of time restoring it to its original splendor. I believe in preserving history." They entered a spacious living room with a stone fireplace and windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. Sarah placed the arrangement on a mahogany coffee table, where the orchids looked even more stunning against the dark wood. "Perfect," said Torino, admiring the flowers. "You have real talent. Where did you learn?" "I studied botany at the university," Sarah replied, relaxing slightly. Torino seemed genuinely interested and not at all threatening. "But I learned the artistic part from my aunt. She always said flowers have their own personality. Your aunt was a wise woman. I also believe that beauty has its own power." He approached the arrangement, inhaling the soft aroma of the orchids. "These are cattleyas, aren't they?" Sarah was impressed. "Yes, they are. Most people can't identify the varieties. My mother was Italian but grew up in a greenhouse in New Jersey. She taught me about flowers when I was a child." Torino smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw something genuinely warm in his eyes. She always said that a man who doesn't appreciate flowers can't appreciate life. They talked for a few more minutes about flowers and gardening. Torino demonstrated surprising knowledge about botany, and Sarah found herself forgetting her initial suspicions. Maybe she had misinterpreted the newspaper articles. Maybe Vincent Torino was just a successful businessman with expensive tastes. "Would you like some coffee?" asked Torino. "I have a special blend that I import from a small roastery in Seattle." Sarah looked at her watch. It was already past 3:30, and she had other commitments. "Thank you, but I need to get back to the shop." "Of course, I understand. But before you go, let me show you something." Torino led her to a glass door that opened onto a terrace. "My private garden." The terrace was stunning. Pots of different sizes housed an impressive variety of plants, from succulents to small fruit trees. But what caught Sarah's attention was a small greenhouse in the corner, its glass walls fogged by internal humidity. "I cultivate some rare species there," explained Torino. "Maybe you'd like to see." Sarah felt her scientific curiosity awaken. "What kind of species?" "Orchids, mainly, but also some medicinal plants. Some are difficult to find in the common market." There was something in the way he said "difficult to find" that made Sarah hesitate. She looked at Torino, trying to read his expression. He seemed sincere, but there was an intensity in his eyes that wasn't there before. "Maybe another time," said Sarah. "I really need to go." "Of course," said Torino, but she noticed a slight tension in his voice. "Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Sarah. I hope we can work together in the future." He accompanied her to the door, where Sarah said goodbye politely. As she walked back to the van, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She looked back and saw Torino still at the door, waving with a smile that didn't seem completely natural. During the drive back to the flower shop, Sarah reflected on the encounter. Torino had been polite, even charming, but there was something underlying that bothered her. The mention of plants difficult to find echoed in her mind. As a botanist, she knew that many rare plants were also dangerous, some even lethal. Back at Petal and Stem, Sarah tried to concentrate on work, but her mind kept returning to Vincent Torino. She did a new online search, this time more specific. What she found left her even more uneasy. There were rumors, never confirmed, about Torino being involved in questionable business. Nothing specific, nothing that could be used in court, but a pattern of suspicious associations. Companies that appeared and disappeared, investments in businesses that seemed to serve more to launder money than generate legitimate profit. Even more disturbing was an article from 3 years ago about a business rival of Torino's who had died suddenly. The official cause was a heart attack, but there were insinuations that the man was perfectly healthy before his death. The investigation had been filed for lack of evidence. Sarah closed the laptop, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had entered a world she didn't fully understand, a world where the beauty of flowers could mask very real dangers. As she closed the shop that night, Sarah made a decision. She would be more careful in the future, ask more questions before accepting suspicious orders. But a part of her, the curious part that had led her to study botany, wanted to know more about Vincent Torino and his secrets. What she didn't know was that her life was about to become much more complicated than she imagined, and that flowers, her passion and profession, would soon become a matter of life and death. Night fell over Portland with its characteristic drizzle, and Sarah Chen drove home, not knowing she had just entered a web of danger that would test not only her knowledge of plants, but also her courage and survival instinct. 3 days had passed since the delivery to Vincent Torino's mansion, and Sarah Chen couldn't get the encounter out of her head. The morning routine at Petal and Stem continued normally. Regular customers buying bouquets for birthdays, businessmen ordering corporate arrangements, young couples choosing flowers for first dates. But beneath the normalcy, an uneasiness grew like an invasive plant. On Thursday morning, while Sarah organized a display of fresh sunflowers that had arrived from a farm in Hood River, the door chime rang. She looked up expecting to see a regular customer, but instead found an elegant woman of about 40, wearing a gray blazer and carrying an Italian leather bag that cost more than Sarah earned in a month. "Sarah Chen?" asked the woman, her voice carrying natural authority. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" The woman approached the counter, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. "My name is Detective Lisa Rodriguez, Portland Police Department." She discreetly showed her identification. "I'd like to ask some questions about a recent delivery you made." Sarah's stomach contracted. She had feared this moment would come, but hoped she was wrong about her suspicions. "Of course, Detective. Which delivery?" "Vincent Torino. You were at his house on Monday." Sarah nodded, trying to keep her voice calm. "Yes, I delivered an orchid arrangement. Why? Did something happen?" Detective Rodriguez looked around the shop, checking if they were alone. "Can we talk in private? Maybe in your office?" Sarah led her to the small office at the back of the shop, a cramped space full of supplier catalogs, invoices, and a desk covered with papers. Rodriguez closed the door behind them and sat in the chair facing the desk. "Miss Chen, how much do you know about Vincent Torino?" "Honestly, very little. 2 men came to my shop Monday morning ordering an expensive arrangement. They mentioned it was for their boss and gave Torino's name for delivery. Did you research him afterward?" Sarah hesitated. Lying to the police wasn't a good idea, but she also didn't want to seem like she was meddling in affairs that didn't concern her. "I did a quick Google search. The name seemed familiar." "And what did you find?" "Articles about business, real estate investments, some insinuations about questionable activities, but nothing specific." Rodriguez nodded. "Your suspicions were correct. Vincent Torino is what we call a businessman with connections. Officially, he manages several legitimate companies. Unofficially, we believe he's an important figure in West Coast organized crime." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "Organized crime? Like the mafia?" "Exactly like the mafia. Torino is smart. He keeps his hands clean on the surface. But our informants suggest he coordinates money laundering operations, extortion, and other activities." "Other activities?" Rodriguez leaned forward. "Miss Chin, in the past 2 years, 3 people who had business conflicts with Torino died of apparently natural causes. Heart attacks, organ failure, things that could happen to anyone, but the frequency is statistically improbable." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you suggesting he killed them?" "I'm suggesting he may have found very sophisticated methods to eliminate problems, methods that don't leave obvious evidence." "But why are you telling me this? I just delivered flowers." Rodriguez paused, studying Sarah's face. "Because we believe Torino may be planning something big. In recent months, he's been meeting with important figures, politicians, judges, businessmen, always at his house, always with elaborate floral arrangements present." "Floral arrangements?" "Yes, and here's the interesting part. All the arrangements came from different flower shops. Never the same one twice. Until now." Sarah frowned. "Until now? You're the first florist he's called back. In fact, one of our informants told us Torino was very impressed with your work. He wants to hire you for a special event." "What kind of event?" "We don't know, but it will happen next weekend, and it will be big. Important politicians, federal judges, influential businessmen, the kind of meeting where important deals are made." Sarah leaned back in her chair, trying to process the information. Detective Rodriguez, I really don't know how I can help. I'm just a florist. You could be our only chance to find out what Torino is planning. Rodriguez leaned forward. We want you to accept the job when he calls. You want me to spy on a mafia boss? Sarah's voice went up an octave. We want you to do your normal work and keep your eyes open. Nothing more. Nothing more? Detective, if this man really kills people, what do you think he'll do to me if he discovers I'm working with the police? Rodriguez sighed. I understand your fears, and they're valid. But consider this. If Torino is planning something big, something involving corruption of public officials, how many innocent people could be harmed? How many lives could be at risk? Sarah looked through the small office window to the shop, where she could see normal customers choosing flowers for happy occasions. Her life had been simple until 3 days ago. Now she was being recruited to spy on a dangerous criminal. I need to think about this, Sarah said finally. Of course. But don't take too long. We believe Torino will call soon. Rodriguez stood up and handed her a business card. My personal number is on the back. Call anytime, day or night. After the detective left, Sarah was alone with her thoughts. She tried to concentrate on work, but her hands trembled as she arranged flowers. Every time the door chime rang, she expected to see Torino's suited men, or worse, Torino himself. Around noon, Sarah decided to close the shop for lunch and walk to Tom McCall Waterfront Park. The fresh air from the Willamette River and the view of Portland's bridges usually calmed her. But today, even the city's beauty couldn't quiet her agitated mind. She sat on a bench facing the river, watching boats slowly pass through the dark water. A family of ducks swam near the shore, the ducklings following their mother in single file. The scene was so normal, so peaceful, that for a moment Sarah almost managed to forget the conversation with Detective Rodriguez. Her phone rang, making her jump. The number was unknown. Hello? Miss Chen? This is Vincent Torino. The voice was unmistakable, the same polite and slightly formal tone she remembered from Monday. Sarah felt her heart race. Mr. Torino, hello. How can I help you? I hope you don't mind that I got your number. I was very impressed with your work on Monday. The orchids are absolutely stunning. I'm glad you liked them. Actually, I'm calling because I have a proposal for you. I'm organizing a special event on Saturday night, a dinner for some friends and business associates. I'd like to hire your services to create the floral arrangements. Sarah took a deep breath. It was exactly what Detective Rodriguez had predicted. What kind of event, Mr. Torino? Nothing too elaborate. About 20 guests. Formal dinner. I need arrangements for the main table and some decorative pieces for the living room. Would you be available? Yes, I believe so. What kind of flowers do you have in mind? I leave that entirely to your artistic discretion. I trust your good taste. The budget is generous. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing she was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. Of course, Mr. Torino. Can I come by your house tomorrow to discuss the details? Perfect. How about 2 in the afternoon? And Sarah, thank you. I'm sure it will be a memorable night. After he hung up, Sarah sat on the bench for a few more minutes, watching the river. She had just agreed to work for a man the police believed to be a killer, but she had also accepted the chance to maybe prevent something terrible from happening. She took out Detective Rodriguez's card and dialed the number. Rodriguez. Detective, this is Sarah Chen. Torino just called. When? Saturday night. A dinner for 20 people. He wants me to go to his house tomorrow at 2 to discuss the details. There was a pause. Sarah, are you sure you want to do this? No, Sarah answered honestly. But I'm going to do it anyway. All right. Let's meet tonight to discuss safety protocols. Do you know Cafe Vita on 23rd? I do. 7 o'clock. And Sarah? Thank you. You're doing the right thing. Sarah hung up and walked slowly back to the flower shop. The afternoon passed in a fog of mechanical activities, serving customers, making arrangements, updating inventory. But her mind was elsewhere, imagining what awaited her at Vincent Torino's house. At 7 o'clock, Sarah arrived at Cafe Vita, a small establishment known for its artisanal coffee and relaxed atmosphere. Detective Rodriguez was already there, sitting at a corner table, wearing jeans and a casual blouse. Without the formal blazer, she looked younger and less intimidating. "Thank you for coming," said Rodriguez when Sarah sat down. "Did you order anything?" "A latte, please." Rodriguez waved to the barista and then leaned forward, lowering her voice. "First, I want you to understand that we don't expect you to do anything dangerous. Your safety is our priority." "That's reassuring, but how can you guarantee my safety if I'm alone in his house?" "You won't be completely alone. We'll have a surveillance team outside. If something goes wrong, we'll be there in seconds." Sarah nodded but didn't feel much more reassured. "What exactly do you want me to look for?" "Anything unusual? Conversations you might overhear, people you recognize, documents left open. But mainly we want you to observe his plants." "The plants? Remember I mentioned the suspicious deaths? Our forensic pathologist believes the victims may have been poisoned with plant toxins, substances that decompose quickly in the body, leaving few traces." Sarah felt a chill. "What kind of plants?" "That's the question. We don't know. We need someone with botanical knowledge to identify what Torino might be growing. He mentioned having a greenhouse with rare plants." "Exactly. If you can get a look in there, it could be the key to everything." The barista brought Sarah's latte, and she took a sip, trying to organize her thoughts. "Detective, I need to ask, why can't you get a search warrant?" Rodriguez sighed. "Politics. Torino has powerful connections, expensive lawyers. We need solid evidence before we move against him, or he'll just slip through our hands again. And if I get caught? You're a florist doing your job. There's nothing illegal about observing plants or listening to conversations at a party where you were hired to work." Sarah wasn't sure the logic was as simple as Rodriguez made it seem, but she nodded anyway. "All right, what else do I need to know?" Rodriguez took a small device from her pocket. "This is a transmitter. It looks like a regular earring, but it transmits audio to our team. Wear it tomorrow." Sarah examined the device. It was really discreet, looking like a simple pearl earring. "What if they search me?" "Unlikely at a social event, but if it happens, just say it's a family heirloom. The transmitter is hidden inside the pearl. They'd have to destroy it to discover it." They spent another hour discussing details, emergency codes, meeting points, what to do if Sarah felt in danger. When they finally separated, Sarah felt slightly more prepared, but no less nervous. That night, in her apartment in the Hawthorne neighborhood, Sarah tried to relax with a cup of chamomile tea and a book about rare orchids. But the words blurred on the page, and she found herself rereading the same paragraph several times. She thought about her Aunt Margaret, who had left her the flower shop. Margaret always said flowers were a force for good in the world, bringing beauty and joy to important moments in people's lives. Sarah wondered what her aunt would think about using flowers as a disguise to spy on a criminal. But then she thought about Torino's victims, people who had died because they opposed him, families destroyed by his greed and violence. If she could help stop him, maybe that was the kind of good Margaret would approve of. Sarah finally fell asleep around midnight, but her dreams were filled with poisonous flowers and suited men chasing her through dark greenhouses. She woke several times, her heart pounding, before finally achieving deep sleep in the early morning hours. On Friday, Sarah spent the morning preparing meticulously for the visit to Torino's house. She chose professional but comfortable clothes, a navy blue blouse and black pants that would allow her to move easily if necessary. The transmitter earring was perfectly disguised, and she practiced speaking naturally while wearing it. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah parked in front of Torino's mansion. The house seemed even more imposing in daylight, its windows reflecting the cloudy sky typical of Portland. She took a deep breath, checked that the transmitter was working by touching it lightly, and walked to the door. Vincent Torino received her personally, wearing a white linen shirt and dark pants. His smile was warm, but Sarah now noticed the way his eyes assessed her, as if calculating something. "Sarah, good to see you again. Please come in." This time, he led her directly to the dining room, an elegant space with a mahogany table that could easily accommodate 20 people. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and the walls were decorated with paintings that appeared to be 19th century originals. Impressive, said Sarah, and her admiration was genuine. "Thank you. This table belonged to a family of bankers from San Francisco. I bought it at an auction a few years ago." Torino ran his hand over the polished surface. "I imagine how many important deals were made here over the years." There was something in the way he said "important deals" that reminded Sarah of Detective Rodriguez's words. She forced a smile. "Well, I hope the arrangements I create will be worthy of the table's history." "I'm sure they will be. Let me show you where I'd like the arrangements placed." Torino guided her through the house, pointing out specific locations for floral pieces. The living room would need 2 large arrangements, the dining table an elaborate centerpiece, and he wanted small bouquets scattered throughout the house to create ambience. "What kind of guests are you expecting?" asked Sarah, trying to sound casual. "This helps me choose the right flowers." "Oh, a mix. Some business colleagues, a federal judge who's an old friend, some local politicians. Influential people who appreciate the finer things in life." Sarah nodded, mentally noting the information. A federal judge. That was exactly the kind of thing that would interest Detective Rodriguez. "And what about the budget?" asked Sarah. "As I said, be generous. Let's say $5,000? Sarah almost choked. $5,000 was more than she usually earned in an entire month. "That's very generous, Mr. Torino. Please call me Vincent. And I believe in paying well for exceptional quality." They continued the tour, and Sarah noticed details she had missed on the first visit. There were security cameras discreetly positioned in various corners, and she saw at least 2 men who were clearly security guards, one in the garden and another who passed quickly through a hallway. "Vincent," said Sarah when they returned to the living room, "you mentioned on Monday that you have a greenhouse with rare plants. As a botanist, I'd be fascinated to see it. Maybe I could incorporate some of your plants into the arrangements." Torino paused, and Sarah saw something pass through his eyes. Caution, maybe even suspicion. "Ah, yes, my little collection. Unfortunately, many of the plants are extremely delicate. Temperature or humidity changes can damage them." "Of course, I understand completely. Maybe just a quick look? I promise not to touch anything." Torino studied her for a long moment. Sarah forced herself to maintain eye contact, trying to appear only professionally curious. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose a quick look wouldn't hurt. But you must understand, some of these plants are extremely valuable. Some cost more than most people earn in a year. Of course, I'll be very careful." Torino led her through the glass door to the terrace. The greenhouse looked even more mysterious up close, its glass walls fogged by internal condensation. He unlocked the door with a key he took from his pocket. "After you," he said, gesturing for her to enter. Sarah entered the greenhouse and immediately felt the hot, humid air envelop her body. The aroma was intense, a mixture of rich earth, humidity, and something else. Something she couldn't identify, but that made her scientific instinct sound alarms. The greenhouse was larger than it appeared from outside, with metal shelves housing dozens of pots. Sarah recognized some of the plants: rare orchids, some exotic bromeliads, small palm trees. But there were others she had never seen before, plants with strangely shaped leaves and colors that seemed almost artificial. "My collection," said Torino with obvious pride. "Some of these species are found only in very specific regions of South America and Asia." Sarah approached a particularly unusual plant. It had dark green leaves with red veins and small white flowers that seemed almost translucent. "This is fascinating. What species is it?" "Ah, that's one of my favorites. Very rare, very potent." The way he said potent made Sarah look more closely. The plant had a sinister beauty, and there was something familiar about its structure that she couldn't identify. "Potent how?" "Let's say it has very specific medicinal properties. In small doses, it can be beneficial. In larger doses..." He left the sentence hanging, but his smile said everything. Sarah felt her blood freeze. She was looking at a poisonous plant, possibly the same one that had killed Torino's victims. She forced herself to maintain a neutral expression. "Fascinating. Medicinal botany has always interested me." "I'm sure it has. You seem to be a woman of many talents, Sarah." There was something in the way he said her name that made her want to leave the greenhouse immediately. She looked around once more, trying to memorize as much as possible about the plants, especially the one Torino had called potent. "Well," she said, "I think I've seen enough. I don't want to abuse your hospitality." "Of course. Let's go back inside." As they left the greenhouse, Sarah noticed that Torino locked the door carefully and put the key in his pocket. They returned to the house, where he offered coffee, but Sarah declined, saying she needed to return to the shop to start working on the arrangements. "Of course. When do you plan to deliver everything?" "Saturday morning, if that works for you. That way I can make final adjustments before the guests arrive." "Perfect. I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll create." Sarah said goodbye and left the house, forcing herself to walk calmly to the van. Only when she was driving down the street did she allow her hands to tremble. She had seen Torino's weapon, not a pistol or knife, but something much more subtle and terrible, a plant that could kill without leaving traces, administered by a man who had turned murder into an art. Now she needed to figure out how to stop him from using this weapon again, before more innocent lives were lost. And she had less than 48 hours to figure out how. Sarah Chen drove through the streets of Portland in a state of controlled shock, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she processed what she had seen in Vincent Torino's greenhouse. The plant with dark green leaves and red veins remained vivid in her mind, and the more she thought about it, the more certain she became that she had seen something similar before, in her botany books, in the section about toxic plants. She parked behind Petal and Stem and entered through the back door, avoiding the main area of the shop where there were still some afternoon customers. In her small office, Sarah turned on the computer and began a frantic search through her botanical databases. Dark green leaves, red veins, translucent white flowers, she murmured to herself as she navigated through hundreds of images. After 20 minutes of searching, she found it. Dieffenbachia seguini, commonly known as dumb cane or mother-in-law's tongue. Sarah read the description with growing horror. The plant contained calcium oxalate crystals and other toxins that, when ingested, caused severe swelling of the throat and tongue, breathing difficulties, and in high doses could lead to death by asphyxiation. But something was wrong. The Dieffenbachia she knew didn't have exactly the appearance of the plant in Torino's greenhouse. She continued researching and found references to hybrid varieties, some created illegally to increase the potency of the toxins. Sarah grabbed the phone and dialed Detective Rodriguez's number. "Rodriguez, Detective, this is Sarah. I need to speak with you immediately." "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, but I saw Torino's greenhouse. He has poisonous plants there, including one I believe is a modified variety of Dieffenbachia." There was a pause. "Where are you now?" "At my shop. Can I meet you somewhere?" "I'll come to you." 10 minutes. Sarah used the time to print everything she had found about Dieffenbachia and related plants. When Rodriguez arrived, she was surrounded by stacks of paper and several open windows on the computer. "Show me what you found," said Rodriguez, sitting in the chair facing the desk. Sarah explained her discovery, showing the images and descriptions of the toxic plants. "The plant I saw in Torino's greenhouse isn't exactly a common Dieffenbachia. The leaves were larger, the veins more pronounced, and the flowers were different. I believe it's a hybrid variety, possibly created to be more potent. How would this work as a murder method? The toxins could be extracted and concentrated. In small quantities, mixed in food or drink, they would cause symptoms that would look like a heart attack or stroke. The victim would have difficulty breathing, the heart would accelerate trying to compensate for the lack of oxygen, and eventually, death that would appear natural," completed Rodriguez, "especially if the victim had risk factors like age or pre-existing heart problems." "Exactly. And the toxins decompose quickly in the body. Unless doctors knew specifically what to look for, they would never find evidence." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "Sarah, this is exactly what we needed. With this information, I can get a warrant to—" "No," interrupted Sarah. "If you raid now, Torino will know someone denounced him, and I'm the only outsider who's been in the greenhouse recently." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah took a deep breath. Let me go to Saturday's dinner as planned. If Torino is planning to poison someone, it will be there. I can try to prevent it. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Detective, think about it. If Torino is organizing a dinner with a federal judge and important politicians, and he has access to plant poisons, what's the probability that it's just an innocent social gathering? Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. You're right, but I can't let you go alone into a potentially deadly situation. I won't be alone. You said you'd have a surveillance team. External surveillance. If something happens inside the house, it might be too late when we reach you. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking at the street where normal people lived normal lives without worrying about mafia bosses and poisonous plants. Detective, how many people could die if we don't stop Torino now? If he manages to eliminate a federal judge or corrupt important politicians, how many innocent lives will be affected? I understand your point, but besides, continued Sarah, I have an advantage you don't have. I understand plants. If Torino tries to use poison, I can recognize the symptoms and maybe even administer first aid. Rodriguez sighed deeply. If we do this, and I said if, you'll follow our instructions exactly. No heroics, no trying to confront Torino alone. Agreed. And you'll wear a more advanced transmitter. We want to hear everything that happens. All right. Rodriguez picked up her phone. I'll need authorization from my supervisor, and we'll need a very detailed plan. They spent the next 2 hours elaborating a strategy. Sarah would enter the house as planned, install the floral arrangements, and stay during dinner to make adjustments as needed. She would observe everything, especially any attempt by Torino to add something to the guests' food or drink. One thing worries me, said Sarah, as they reviewed the plan. How would Torino administer the poison? He can't just put it in everyone's food. That would be too obvious. He probably has a specific target, maybe the federal judge or a politician who isn't cooperating with his schemes. Then I need to find out who the target is and how he plans to administer the poison. And if you find out, you alert us immediately. Don't try to intervene alone. Sarah nodded, but mentally reserved the right to act if she saw someone in immediate danger. On Saturday morning, Sarah woke before dawn. She had spent the previous night preparing the most elaborate arrangements of her career. $5,000 allowed her to use the most expensive and rare flowers available. Paphiopedilum orchids, Juliet roses that cost $50 each, and Casablanca lilies imported from Holland. But while creating beauty with one hand, with the other she prepared her own defense. Sarah had researched antidotes for Dieffenbachia poisoning and related plants. She prepared a small emergency bag with activated charcoal, which could absorb toxins if administered quickly, and a strong antihistamine that could reduce throat swelling. At 10 in the morning, Sarah loaded her van with the arrangements and drove to Torino's mansion. The police surveillance team was already positioned. Rodriguez had discreetly pointed out the vehicles during a reconnaissance pass the night before. Torino received her at the door, wearing an impeccable dark suit. Sarah, the arrangements are magnificent, he said, admiring the pieces in the van. You've exceeded my expectations. Thank you. Where would you like me to start the installation? Let me help you carry everything inside first. As they moved the arrangements, Sarah noticed there was more security than on the previous visit. She counted at least 4 men in strategic positions around the property. Clearly, Torino expected the night to be important. Sarah spent the next 2 hours carefully positioning each arrangement. The dining room centerpiece was her masterpiece, a cascade of white and pink orchids interspersed with deep red roses, all arranged in a crystal vase that reflected the light from the chandeliers. Impressive, said Torino, watching her make final adjustments. You have a real gift. Thank you. The flowers deserve to be presented properly. I agree completely. By the way, I hope you can stay tonight to make any necessary adjustments during dinner. Sometimes flowers need special attention. Sarah nodded. Of course. I'll stay in the back so as not to disturb your guests. Nonsense. You're an artist. I'd like you to meet some important people. Who knows, you might get new clients. This wasn't in the plan. Sarah was supposed to stay discreet, observe from afar, But if Torino insisted she interact with the guests, it would be difficult to refuse without seeming suspicious. That's very kind of you. Excellent. Dinner starts at 7. Why don't you come back at 6:30 for final adjustments? Sarah agreed and left the house, driving directly to a pre-arranged meeting point with Rodriguez in a parking lot a few blocks away. How did it go? Asked Rodriguez, getting into the passenger side of the van. He wants me to stay for dinner and meet the guests. That wasn't in the plan. Actually, it might be better. You'll have closer access to what's happening. Rodriguez handed Sarah a new transmitter, this one disguised as a small flower brooch. This has longer range and better audio quality. And it has a panic button hidden here. She pointed to a small petal. If you press this, we'll be inside the house in less than 2 minutes. What if 2 minutes is too long? Then you use this. Rodriguez handed Sarah a small bottle with clear liquid. Ipecac syrup. If you suspect someone has been poisoned, this will induce vomiting immediately, expelling any toxin still in the stomach. Sarah put the bottle in her bag, along with her other emergency supplies. Any news about who the guests will be? We managed to confirm some names. Federal Judge Marcus Webb will be there. He's presiding over an important case against one of Torino's front companies. Also, Councilman David Chen, no relation to you, who has been vocal against the development of certain properties Torino wants to buy. So either of them could be the target, or both. Be extra careful, Sarah. Sarah went home to prepare. She chose a simple but elegant black dress, appropriate for a formal dinner, but that would also allow her to move quickly if necessary. The transmitter brooch looked perfect on the lapel, appearing to be just an elegant accessory. At 6:30, Sarah returned to Torino's mansion. The house was transformed. Soft lights, classical music playing quietly, and the aroma of gourmet food coming from the kitchen. The floral arrangements she had created looked even more stunning under the carefully planned lighting. "Sarah, you look beautiful," said Torino when she arrived. "Come, let me introduce you to some of the first guests." He led her to the living room where 3 men were conversing with drinks in their hands. Sarah recognized one of them from the photos Rodriguez had shown. Judge Marcus Webb, a distinguished man of about 60, with graying hair and gold-rimmed glasses. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, the artist responsible for these magnificent floral creations." Judge Webb approached, extending his hand. "Miss Chen, your work is truly exceptional. These orchids are among the most beautiful I've ever seen." "Thank you, Your Honor. It's a pleasure to meet you." While they talked, Sarah discreetly observed Torino. He was being the perfect host, attentive, charming, making sure everyone had drinks and felt comfortable. But there was something in his eyes when he looked at Judge Webb, an intensity that didn't match his casual smile. More guests arrived over the next half hour. Sarah was introduced to everyone. Local politicians, prominent businessmen, a federal prosecutor. It was an impressive gathering of powerful people, exactly the kind of group Torino would need to influence to expand his operations. At 7:30, Torino announced that dinner was served. The table was stunning. Fine crystal, antique porcelain, silver cutlery, and Sarah's centerpiece creating a perfect focal point. Sarah was placed in a chair in the middle of the table, where she could observe all the guests. The first course was served, a pumpkin soup with truffle. Sarah watched carefully as the waiters served each guest, looking for any sign that something was being added to someone's specific food. Everything seemed normal. During the second course, grilled salmon with risotto, the conversation flowed about local politics, real estate developments, and investments. Sarah noticed that Torino subtly directed the discussion to topics that interested his business, always in a casual and natural way. "Marcus," said Torino, addressing the judge, "I heard you're presiding over the Riverside development case. It must be complex." Judge Webb nodded. "Very complex. There are serious allegations of financial irregularities. I'm sure you'll reach the right decision. You've always been known for your impartiality." There was something in the way Torino said impartiality that made Sarah pay extra attention. She noticed the judge seemed slightly uncomfortable with the comment. The third course was being served, lamb with red wine sauce, when Sarah noticed something strange. One of the waiters, a young man she hadn't seen before, approached specifically to Judge Webb. He placed the plate in front of the judge, and for a very brief moment, his hand hovered over the food. Sarah watched more closely. The waiter had something small in his hand. It looked like a small vial or dropper. While pretending to adjust the plate's position, he quickly added a few drops of a clear liquid to the sauce. Sarah's heart raced. This was it. Torino was poisoning Judge Webb. She looked around the table, but no one else seemed to have noticed. The judge was talking to the guest beside him, completely unaware of the danger. Sarah knew she had seconds to act. She couldn't scream or cause a scene. That would alert Torino and possibly put everyone in danger. But she also couldn't let the judge eat the poisoned food. She stood up quickly, pretending to adjust the centerpiece. "Excuse me," she said. "One of the orchids is falling. Let me fix it quickly." As she leaned over the centerpiece, Sarah accidentally bumped into Judge Webb's arm, making him drop his fork. The fork fell onto the plate, spreading the sauce. "Oh, I'm so sorry," exclaimed Sarah. "How clumsy of me." "Don't worry," said the judge, smiling. "Accidents happen. Let me ask them to change your plate," said Sarah quickly, signaling to a different waiter. "It's not necessary," protested the judge. But Sarah was already gesturing insistently. Torino watched the scene with narrowed eyes. "Sarah, I'm sure the judge can eat it as is." "Nonsense," said Sarah, forcing a bright smile. "Such an important guest deserves perfect presentation. Besides, the sauce is all spread out now." The waiter arrived and took the contaminated plate. Sarah breathed with relief when she saw the poisoned food disappear into the kitchen. Judge Webb received a new plate a few minutes later, but Sarah noticed that Torino continued watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Was there suspicion there, or was it just irritation at having his plans interrupted? The rest of dinner passed without incident. Sarah forced herself to participate in the conversation, laughing at appropriate moments and making comments about flowers when asked. But her mind was racing, trying to figure out what Torino would do now that his first plan had failed. After the main course, there was a pause before dessert. Some guests went out to the terrace to smoke cigars. Others moved to the living room. Sarah took the opportunity to discreetly approach Judge Webb. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" The judge seemed surprised but nodded. Sarah led him to a quieter corner of the living room. "I'm going to sound crazy," she said, keeping her voice low, "but I believe someone tried to poison your food during dinner." The judge looked at her with incredulity. "Poison? Miss Chen, that's a very serious accusation." "I know how it sounds, but I saw a waiter add something to your sauce. That's why I knocked over your fork, to prevent you from eating it." Judge Webb studied her face for a long moment. "You're serious, completely serious." "Your Honor, you're presiding over a case against one of Torino's companies, aren't you?" "How do you know that?" "Please, just trust me. You need to leave here now." Before the judge could respond, Torino appeared beside them. "I hope you're not discussing business," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is a night to relax." "Of course not," said the judge quickly. "Sarah was just telling me about the orchids." "Ah, yes, the orchids." Torino looked directly at Sarah. "Sarah has impressive knowledge about plants, especially about their special properties." The way he said this made Sarah's blood freeze. He knew. Somehow Torino had discovered that she knew about his poisonous plants. "Well, Tasti," said Torino, "dessert is being served. Homemade tiramisu, a special family recipe. I hope everyone will try it." Sarah felt panic growing in her chest. If Torino knew she had interfered with his first plan, the dessert could be his second attempt. And this time, he might target not just the judge, but also her. "Actually," said Sarah, trying to keep her voice calm, "I'm feeling a bit nauseous. I think I'll get some fresh air." "What a shame," said Torino. "I'm sure you'd love the dessert. It's unforgettable." Sarah forced a smile and headed for the terrace, her heart pounding. She needed to alert Rodriguez immediately, but when she reached the terrace, she discovered she wasn't alone. Two of Torino's security men were there, and they didn't seem interested in letting her pass. "Miss Chen," said one of them, "Mr. Torino would like to speak with you, privately." Sarah looked back and saw Torino approaching. his smile now completely gone. Behind him, she could see the other guests being led back to the dining room for dessert. "Of course," said Sarah, trying to sound casual as her hand moved discreetly to the panic button on her brooch. "What would he like to talk about?" "I think you already know," said Torino, stopping a few meters from her. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Sarah pressed the panic button and prayed that Rodriguez and her team would arrive in time, because now she was face to face with a killer, and there was no more pretending she was just an innocent florist doing her job. The terrace of Vincent Torino's mansion was bathed in the soft light of Japanese lanterns swaying in Portland's night breeze. Sarah Chen found herself surrounded, Torino in front of her, 2 security guards blocking her exit, and the abyss of her situation deepening with each passing second. The panic button had been activated, but she knew she would need to buy time until Rodriguez's team arrived. "Sarah," said Torino, his voice maintaining a conversational tone that contrasted frighteningly with the tension of the moment. "You have disappointed me deeply. I really hoped we could have a lasting partnership." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady while her eyes discreetly searched for escape routes. Torino laughed softly, a sound that had nothing of humor. "Please don't insult me with denials. You saved Judge Webb from a very elegant death. The question now is, how did you know?" Sarah realized that lying would be useless. Torino had clearly already reached his own conclusions. "I saw the waiter add something to his sauce." "Ah, but that doesn't explain why you cared enough to intervene. An ordinary florist would have assumed it was just a special seasoning." Torino took a step closer, unless she knew exactly what she was looking for. The sound of laughter and conversations came from the dining room, where the other guests were being served dessert. Sarah thought of Judge Webb and the others, potentially consuming poison at this very moment. "You need to stop this," said Sarah, abandoning any pretense. "These people are innocent." "Innocent?" Torino raised an eyebrow. "Sarah, you're more naive than I thought. Judge Webb is about to destroy years of careful work with his decision in the Riverside case. Councilman Chen has systematically blocked my development projects. They chose to oppose me. That doesn't give you the right to kill them." "Right?" Torino laughed again. "Dear Sarah, rights are for people who have the power to exercise them. I built an empire because I understand that sometimes difficult decisions need to be made." Sarah heard a subtle noise coming from the direction of the house. Maybe it was her imagination, or maybe it was the sound of Rodriguez's team positioning themselves. She needed to keep Torino talking. "How did you discover that I knew about the plants?" she asked. "Ah, that was fascinating to discover. You see, after your visit to my greenhouse, I did some research about you. Imagine my surprise to discover that you're not just an ordinary florist, but a trained botanist with specialization in plant toxicology." Sarah's heart sank. She had completely underestimated Torino's investigative capacity. "But that wasn't what really alerted me," he continued. "It was when my security system captured you talking to someone in your car yesterday. Someone who identified themselves as Detective Rodriguez." Sarah felt her blood freeze. "You were following me." "My dear, I didn't survive this long in this business by being careless. When someone shows unusual interest in my rare plants, I pay attention." One of the security guards approached Torino and whispered something in his ear. Torino's face hardened. "It seems your police friends are positioning themselves around the property," he said. "What a shame. I really hope to resolve this more civilly." Sarah heard the distant sound of sirens approaching. Rodriguez's team was coming, but she knew Torino wouldn't surrender easily. "Vincent," she said, trying a different approach, "you can still stop this. No one has died yet. You can surrender and—" "Surrender?" Torino interrupted her, his mask of civility finally falling completely. "Sarah, you really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you?" He gestured to one of the security guards, who immediately drew a weapon. "Bring Judge Webb here, now." "Vincent, don't do this," Sarah pleaded. "You forced my hand, dear. If I can't eliminate my problems discreetly, I'll have to be more direct." The security guard disappeared into the house. Sarah could hear confused voices and the sound of chairs being dragged. Moments later, Judge Webb was brought to the terrace, clearly confused and frightened. "Mr. Torino, what's happening?" asked the judge. "A change of plans, Marcus. You see, you have an important decision to make next week, a decision that will significantly affect my interests." Judge Webb looked around, noticing for the first time the armed security guards and the palpable tension in the air. "Vincent, if this is about the Riverside case, you know I can't discuss—" "Oh, but you can," interrupted Torino. "And you will, because the alternative is very unpleasant for everyone involved." The sirens were louder now, clearly approaching the property. Sarah could see flashing lights through the trees surrounding the mansion. "Your friends have arrived," said Torino to Sarah, "but I'm afraid it's too late to avoid some casualties." He made another gesture, and more security guards appeared, escorting other guests to the terrace. Sarah recognized Councilman Chen among them, along with several other politicians and businessmen. All looked confused and increasingly alarmed. "Gentlemen," announced Torino, "I apologize for the abrupt interruption of dinner. Unfortunately, we have some urgent matters to discuss." "Vincent, what the hell is happening?" asked one of the businessmen. "What's happening, Robert, is that some of you have been making decisions that harm my business, and that simply cannot continue." The sound of vehicles arriving echoed from the front of the house. Sarah knew Rodriguez and her team were now positioned, but she also knew Torino had hostages, a situation that would drastically complicate any rescue attempt. "Now," said Torino, turning his attention back to Judge Webb, "about that decision in the Riverside case. You're going to dismiss all charges against my company." "I can't do that," the judge replied firmly. "It would be obstruction of justice." "Marcus, look around you. Do you really think you're in a position to refuse?" At that moment, Detective Rodriguez's amplified voice echoed from the front of the house. "Vincent Torino, this is the Portland Police Department. The property is surrounded. Release the hostages and surrender." Torino smiled coldly. "How dramatic. But I'm afraid things aren't that simple." He turned to one of his security guards. "Bring the special briefcase from my office." Sarah felt a chill of terror. She didn't know what was in the special briefcase, but she suspected it wasn't anything good. While they waited, Torino continued his conversation with the hostages. "You see, gentlemen, I've built a very successful business here in Portland, but success requires maintenance. Sometimes obstacles need to be removed." "You're talking about murder," said Councilman Chen, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm talking about efficient resource management," corrected Torino. "And you, unfortunately, have become poorly managed resources." The security guard returned with a metal briefcase. Torino opened it, revealing several syringes filled with a clear liquid, along with small vials containing what appeared to be plant extracts. "Ah, my special collection," said Torino with genuine pride. "Concentrated extracts from various fascinating plants, each designed to produce specific symptoms." Sarah recognized some of the vials. The liquids had the characteristic colors of plant extracts she had studied, but there were others she didn't recognize. Substances that seemed to have been refined and concentrated beyond anything she had seen in textbooks. "This one here," said Torino, picking up a syringe, "is derived from my special Dieffenbachia. It causes respiratory paralysis in approximately 10 minutes. Very effective." "You're insane," whispered one of the guests. "Insane? No, my dear friend, I'm simply practical." Torino approached Judge Webb. "Now, Marcus, about that decision." "I will never give in to blackmail," said the judge, trying to maintain dignity despite the obvious fear in his eyes. "How noble. But what if it weren't just about you?" Torino gestured to the other hostages. "What if your refusal resulted in the death of all these innocent men?" Sarah knew she needed to act. The police were outside, but Torino was clearly prepared for a prolonged confrontation. And with each passing minute, the situation became more dangerous for the hostages. "Vincent," she said, stepping forward, "let me make a proposal." Torino turned to her, curious. "I'm listening." "You want me because I interfered with your plans. Well, here I am. Let the others go, and you can do whatever you want with me." "Sarah, no," protested Judge Webb. "Interesting," said Torino, considering the offer. "But I'm afraid you overestimate your value to me. You're a problem, yes, but these men represent much bigger obstacles to my business. But I'm the only one who can identify your poisonous plants, said Sarah quickly. I'm the only one who understands your methods. If you kill me, you lose the opportunity to learn how to improve your techniques. It was a desperate lie, but Sarah hoped that Torino's ego as a poison artist could be exploited. Torino paused, clearly intrigued. Continue. You spent years developing these plants, creating these extracts, but you're self-taught, aren't you? You never had formal training in plant biochemistry. And I have. I can help you refine your methods, make them more effective, harder to detect. Sarah forced enthusiasm into her voice. Imagine what we could create working together. For a moment, Sarah saw genuine interest in Torino's eyes. But then he shook his head. A tempting offer, but I'm afraid our window of opportunity has closed. The police are here. You're clearly an informant, and I have urgent business to resolve. He turned back to Judge Webb, syringe in hand. Last chance, Marcus. It was then that Sarah noticed something that had gone unnoticed before. One of the potted plants on the terrace, a small Datura stramonium known as Devil's Trumpet, was positioned near where Torino was standing. The plant was highly toxic, but also had hallucinogenic properties when burned. Sarah remembered a lighter she had seen on a side table when she arrived. If she could reach it and set the plant on fire, the resulting smoke could cause enough confusion to give the police an opportunity to act. But first, she needed to create a distraction. Vincent, wait, she said, feigning panic. There's something you need to know about the police out there. What? They're not just here because of the hostages. They know about your plans. Someone else is working with them, someone from inside your organization. Torino turned completely toward her, his attention totally focused. Explain. How do you think they knew exactly when to attack? How did they know about tonight's dinner? Sarah improvised desperately. Someone close to you has been passing information. She saw doubt and paranoia pass through Torino's eyes. In her experience, men like him always suspected betrayal. Who? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not sure, but... Sarah moved slightly toward the side table. Detective Rodriguez mentioned they've had someone on the inside for months. Torino looked around at his security guards, clearly suspecting each one of them. It was exactly the distraction Sarah needed. She lunged for the side table, grabbed the lighter, and in one fluid motion, lit the dry leaves of the datura. The plant caught fire immediately, releasing thick, acrid smoke. What the hell? Torino turned, but the smoke was already spreading rapidly across the terrace. The effects were almost immediate. The smoke from burning datura contained tropane alkaloids that caused disorientation and hallucinations. Torino and his men began coughing and staggering, their vision and coordination compromised. Sarah shouted, "Now! Everyone get down!" The hostages, though confused, instinctively threw themselves to the ground. Seconds later, the police tactical team exploded through the terrace doors, taking advantage of the confusion caused by the smoke. What followed was controlled chaos. Through the thick smoke, Sarah could hear shouts of "Police! On the ground!" the sound of weapons being dropped, and the noises of a brief but intense struggle. When the smoke finally dissipated, Torino and his security guards were on the ground, handcuffed. Detective Rodriguez was kneeling beside Sarah, checking if she was injured. "Are you okay?" asked Rodriguez. "I am," Sarah replied, coughing. "What about the others? All safe? What the hell did you burn?" "Datura stramonium. The smoke causes temporary disorientation, but it's not lethal in small quantities." Rodriguez shook her head in admiration. "You saved everyone's life here." As the scene was processed, Sarah watched Torino being taken away. Even handcuffed and defeated, he maintained an expression of defiance. When he passed by her, he stopped. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You have no idea how deep this goes." "Maybe not," Sarah replied, "but at least this part is over." In the hours that followed, Sarah gave her detailed testimony about the night's events. Torino's briefcase was confiscated, along with all the plants from his greenhouse. The extracts would be analyzed to determine exactly which toxins he had developed. Judge Webb approached Sarah before leaving. "Miss Chen, I have no words to thank you for what you did tonight. Just doing what was right, Your Honor. Well, if you ever need anything at all, you have my number." When she finally got home, in the early hours of Sunday morning, Sarah sat in her small kitchen with a cup of tea, trying to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, her life had been completely transformed. She thought about petal and stem, about her regular customers who came to buy flowers for happy occasions, about her simple and predictable routine. All of that was still there, waiting for her, but she knew she would never be the same. Her phone rang. It was Detective Rodriguez. "How are you feeling?" asked the detective. "Exhausted, but alive." "Well, I have some news that might interest you." The preliminary analysis of Torino's plants revealed that he had developed at least 6 different toxins, some of which had never been seen before. Your botanical knowledge was crucial in identifying them. And now Torino will face charges of attempted murder, kidnapping, and a dozen other things. Thanks to you, he'll never be a threat again. After Rodriguez hung up, Sarah walked to her small balcony, where she kept some pots with herbs and flowers. The city of Portland stretched before her, its lights beginning to dim with the approach of dawn. She gently touched the petals of a rose she had planted the previous month. The flower was simple, unpretentious, but beautiful in its purity. It was a reminder of why she had chosen to work with plants in the first place. Not for the power they could have over life and death, but for the joy and beauty they brought to the world. Sarah knew she would have to deal with the consequences of what had happened. There would be more testimonies, possibly a trial, and certainly changes in how she viewed her work and her life. But for now, she was content to simply be alive, breathing the fresh morning air, and planning how she would return to her flower shop to create beauty instead of confronting evil. The sun was rising over Portland, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. It was a new day, and Sarah Chen was ready to embrace it. 3 months had passed since the night on Vincent Torino's terrace, and Sarah Chen's life had found a new rhythm. Petal and Stem was busier than ever. The story of how a florist had helped bring down a mafia boss had spread throughout the city, bringing an unexpected wave of curious customers and admirers. On a sunny Thursday morning in December, Sarah was organizing a display of red poinsettias when the door chime rang. She looked up and smiled to see Detective Lisa Rodriguez entering, carrying 2 coffees. "Thought you could use a break," said Rodriguez, handing one of the cups to Sarah. "I can always use coffee," Sarah replied, gratefully accepting the drink. "How was the trial yesterday?" Torino was sentenced to 25 years without possibility of parole. The evidence we collected from his greenhouse was decisive. Rodriguez leaned against the counter. He tried to negotiate until the last minute, offering information about other criminal operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. And the judge wasn't interested, especially after your testimony about how he tried to poison Judge Webb. Sarah nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Justice had been served, but she knew the ramifications of Torino's empire would continue to be uncovered for years. "There's something else," said Rodriguez. "The FBI wants to offer you a position as a consultant. They're setting up a specialized unit for crimes involving plant toxins." Sarah paused, considering the offer. "It's tempting, but I think I prefer to stick with flowers. At least for now. I understand, but the offer remains open." After Rodriguez left, Sarah returned to work, but her thoughts wandered to the changes in her life. The money Torino had paid for the arrangements, money she had decided to donate to crime victim organizations, had allowed her to expand the shop. Now she had 2 part-time employees and was considering opening a second location. More importantly, she had found a new purpose. Sarah began giving lectures on botanical safety to community groups, teaching people to identify dangerous plants. It was her way of ensuring that the knowledge that almost cost her life could protect others. At 3 in the afternoon, Sarah was preparing a wedding arrangement when a young man entered the shop. He seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. "Can I help you?" asked Sarah. "Are you Sarah Chen? The one who, stopped that guy?" "Yes, that's me. What can I do for you?" The man approached the counter, lowering his voice. My name is Marcus. I worked for Torino in the kitchen. Sarah felt her attention sharpen. Continue. I was the waiter who put that thing in the judge's food. Torino told me it was just a special seasoning, but later I discovered the truth. His hands were trembling. I wanted to thank you for stopping it. I don't know how I'd live with myself if... You didn't know, said Sarah gently. Torino manipulated many people. Even so, and I wanted to warn you, there are rumors that some of Torino's former associates weren't happy with what happened. You should be careful. Sarah nodded, thanking him for the information. After Marcus left, she called Rodriguez to report the conversation. It was a reminder that while Torino was imprisoned, the consequences of his actions still reverberated. That night, Sarah closed the shop and walked to Tom McCall Waterfront Park, where she had gone to think on the day it all began. The Willamette River reflected the city lights, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of approaching rain. She thought about her Aunt Margaret, who always said flowers had the power to heal. Sarah had discovered they also had the power to reveal truth and protect the innocent. Her phone chimed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Thank you for saving my life. Judge Webb. Sarah smiled, putting away her phone. She had started as a simple florist who wanted to bring beauty to the world. Now she was that and much more. A guardian, a protector, someone who used her knowledge to make a difference. As she walked back home, Sarah stopped in front of a small flower shop that was for sale. It was smaller than Petal and Stem, but had potential. Maybe it was time to expand, to spread more beauty throughout the city. She took a photo of the for sale sign and sent it to Rodriguez with a message. What do you think about having a florist as a neighbor? The response came quickly. I think Portland could use all the beauty it can get. Sarah smiled, looking at the city lights spreading before her. Her life had changed forever that night on Torino's terrace, but she had discovered that change wasn't always something to be feared. Sometimes, like flowers that bloomed after winter, change was just the beginning of something more beautiful. 3 days later, Sarah signed the papers to buy the second flower shop. As she handed the keys of Petal and Stem to her new manager, she looked around the shop that had been her refuge and her battlefield. Take good care of her, said Sarah. Always, replied the manager. And Sarah, thank you for showing that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Sarah smiled, picked up a small pot with a white orchid, the same species she had used in the first arrangement for Torino, and walked outside, ready to plant new roots in safer soil. The future was full of possibilities, and Sarah Chen was ready to cultivate them, one flower at a time.